Thank you very much, Richard. And I do have to admit to being very disappointed to not have to play the Imperial Death March for anybody. Maybe we'll hold that one for the next session. All right, we will now have an opportunity to quiz our 8x8ers about their presentations, but before we do, we've also opened up the SMS voting lines for you to let us know who your favourite speaker was or who had the best new idea. Codes for all the speakers are on the screen. All you need to do is text the code that corresponds with your favourite speaker to 0429 883 481. So grab out your phones, vote now, and at the end we'll be announcing the People's Choice winner. And I'm sure we have a wonderful prize to hand out for that. As I said, we're now moving into the question and answer session. We don't have SMS questions in this session, but we do have people with microphones. So if you have a question, and there's plenty in these 8 presentations, if you do have a question, put up your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. But I might kick things off and asking, perhaps starting with Alex, what has the uptake been of eTool? And I guess as an extension, we've had 2 presentations from Deb and Richard about big data. What opportunities are there perhaps of merging the eTool system with big data software packages?
That's a good question. Lifecycle assessment's been around for a really, really long time, but I think it's really only been in the last year that it's really grown in demand in the building industry. It was sort of, as I said, in the basement of academia, looking at maybe an individual product like CLT. And more recently we're now looking at buildings, so it's growing really quick, and obviously the introduction into Green Stars through the Innovation Challenge has helped a lot, but a lot of our work's still outside of Green Stars, just through clients who are just looking for a higher performance building. So it's moving fast. I mean, eTool's not the only LCA software out there. There's lots of other good tools out there, and it's great because I think we're all collaborating and improving what we're doing. And yeah, definitely the tie-in to things like CLT is awesome. I'm a massive supporter of timber, and I think we've got an awesome future there. But all the way through, I mean, Chris mentioned biomass and turning things into pellets. It's really interesting with timber. It's great, it sequesters carbon, but if you dispose of it and throw it into landfill, it'll turn into methane, and that's not a good outcome. So one of the biggest influencing factors on the life cycle assessment of a timber building is what happens to it at the end of its life. So yeah, there's some really exciting challenges ahead of us.
We have a question down the front here.
Jeff Robinson from Aurecon. I suppose I'd like to just ask a question to my colleague, Chris Buntine, about how big you think the opportunity is for that particular technology. I mean, it's a really innovative technology to take food waste, which is just generally ending up in landfill. You know, have you heard of much of people being interested in it? Are there other vendors other than Eco Guardians? Can you tell us a little bit more about where you think it might go?
Well, I think it has significant potential. It's already been demonstrated in other countries where they have prohibited the disposal of food waste to landfill. So, for instance, take South Korea. It's, you know, everybody was, saddled with this challenge back in 2005. What are they going to do with their food waste? Now they can't send it to landfill. So it stimulated the growth and development of a lot of these kinds of technologies. So they're somewhat mature now, although they're fairly new to Australia. That being said, there's probably 5 to 10 projects that already have these units or have them procured and are in the process of getting them installed at different scales in Australia. I think there have been various efforts to work with some different technologies, in-vessel composting, for instance, and other ways of composting. They can be very time-intensive, space-intensive. Anaerobic digesters can work well, but can be quite capital-intensive and complicated to maintain. So for a lot of organisations, particularly hospitals, but other commercial vendors, they need something that's pretty robust, and this technology seems to fit the bill quite well. A very small learning curve and safe. Not a lot of risk. So, you know, we're not worried about whether that waste has composted properly. It's a very controlled process. So, I think it has a lot of potential.
Thank you, and thank you, Jeff, for that wonderful Dorothy Dixer to your colleague. The federal election will be coming up in a couple of years. I'm sure we'll look forward to you standing. We have another question up the back.
Jan Ryan from By Design and TEDx Sydney. This is to Nina James. I was really curious the way you talked about the cost of green roofs and how that was holding us back, as well as other things, of course, but focusing on the cost, because yesterday there was a really nice idea about philanthropy changing the way that buildings are made and projects are made in America, California in particular. Have you looked at philanthropy as a way of making the change?
There are examples, even in Sydney actually, of private buildings where they put in significant green roofs that are privately funded, but they're more associated where the green roof provides an amenity to the building. So in 8 minutes I didn't really have time to go into the very different kinds of green roofs, but some green roofs allow you to go out there and enjoy it as a social space, and that's where philanthropy tends to get involved. But I got really excited yesterday too, because I thought if we could start to organise even those funding models of being able to say, well, offsetting the cost, if a city looked at the cost of green roofs and said, well, it costs us X amount of dollars to treat that stormwater when it hits the ground, but we could treat it up on the roof, and it would be, you know, better water quality hitting the ground and less water hitting the ground. That means that they can adjust their infrastructure they have to put in the ground. There's a beautiful way of doing some holistic costing of the way that, you know, we were talking about yesterday about money in different buckets, and then all of a sudden putting them all in the same bucket. And I got really excited about that idea in terms of green roofs and how that might sort of start to address some of those cost issues. But I also think that like some of the subjects we were talking about yesterday, like solar, the cost of green roofs is coming down very quickly because we're getting better at doing it and we're starting to have the knowledge on the ground here. They are getting a lot cheaper than they were even 5 years ago when I started doing the research. So.
We do have a question for the floor, but I might just have as a follow-up. You raised a whole heap of barriers that are sort of preventing green roofs from being seen in Sydney. If you could remove one barrier that you think would deliver more green roofs tomorrow, what would it be? Would it be cash for property owners? Would it be changing regulations? What would that one thing be that you think would deliver green roofs?
I do think it's around cost, because I think industry capacity will happen. It's already happening. We're building the industry. We've got the expertise, and it's growing rapidly. I think we've already got the technical solutions to the waterproof membrane perceived risk. So, and the initial inhibitor is that the green roof doesn't get over the line even to the DA, because the architect presents it to the client and says, we've got this great idea and it's going to address all these issues. But the client looks at it and says, but that's going to cost me 83% more than just putting up a regular roof. So that's really why when I was looking at the City of Sydney's policy and saying, well, you've skipped incentives and disincentives, and that's really, really important in empowering the industry to take action, I would say.
Of course, incentives are far better than disincentives.
Yeah.
We have a question down here in the front.
Thank you. Danielle King. Got a question for Anissa regarding the CLT. I'm a big fan of the CLT building structures, and I've been into the Lendlease building. I think it's lovely. Love to see a few more of those around, and a bit disappointing to hear that a lot of people aren't prepared to take the risk. And I think part of the problem, as you rightly said, is that the stuff has to be manufactured overseas and brought in. I was just wondering, my question is, what would it take to get CLT manufactured here in Australia, given that, especially down in Geelong, we have a few car factories about to leave the country? Surely some of that sort of space could be re-engineered or refitted to take up some of this process. Do you think that's something that's feasible?
Look, the opportunities are endless when it comes to this as potentially being a wonderful industry that Australia can embrace. So there's actually a lot of industries that are, lobbying for this to become, part of what Australia does. So, look, I think there is some push, but we need, it's the chicken and the egg. Nobody will produce CLT until people demand it. People won't demand it because no one's producing it. So that's why we feel it's our role to get out there and spruik about CLT. The more people that want it, the more that the industry will get behind it, And we potentially could see a great industry grow. You know, the forestry industry are very interested in this. They want to become involved. And I know that there is talk with other suppliers in Europe to bring their technology over here. It's just finding that champion who will put their hand in their very deep pocket. But how wonderful would it be for those people from the car manufacturing industry to be retrained into providing a sustainable product?
I might just add on, in a former life I was involved in some CLT discussions, and the answer from Carter Holt Harvey was 55-storey buildings. If they could secure that on an annualised basis, they would pay for the cost of the machinery.
Yeah, I'm hearing if there were 15 Fortes built a year, bring on a manufacturing plant.
Yeah. We have a question down here at the front. While it's coming down, I might just ask another quick question. Big data, and I have to admit I'm a big fan of big data. It's a very confusing term though. A lot of people don't really understand what it means. Maybe Deb and Richard, could you talk a bit more about how you see it having an impact on the industry and how quickly you think industry is coming to grips with the opportunities that it presents?
Yeah, well, just talking to the couple of points that were raised there is about how we overcome the risk of specifying things differently. So it has to be driven by the client. The consultants that are all advising on these projects will always specify something that they know works. And so if you're going to do something differently, which goes to my point in my slides about having to create this culture of acceptance of innovation and accepting an element of risk, because it has to be driven by the client. In terms of the big data question that you're asking about, our view on this is no one single company will solve it. It will be a collaborative effort. If you look at building systems traditionally, they were dominated by the Honeywells, Johnson Controls, Siemens and Schneiders. Buildings have not changed very much in the technologies that are implemented in buildings for the last 30 years. Most of the specifications still look very similar to the ones that have been coming out for the last 20 years. If we are to bring technology to buildings, it will not be one single company that will do that. It will be a collaborative effort. And if you look at the systems that people are starting to embrace in their own businesses, they never pick just one system anymore. They pick bits and pieces of solutions that work for them, and they have interconnectivity with other systems. And so you'll pick the best of breed CRM that works with your accounting system, that works with your marketing email campaigns. And that's our view of the big data and the building systems too, is that people will pick the best of breed from interoperable systems, and that's how we'll get there.